So, hello and welcome back. As you can see, we destroyed the seating order completely because in the last track it was a working place. And the best of all, it will stay a working place now. Please welcome Elisabeth Richter.
Thank you, Johannes. A very warm welcome from my side as well. The topic, or the working topic today or in this afternoon, is organizational Panta Rhei. I stated no one ever steps in the same organization twice. But why is that? What does it mean for an organization? You can't hear anything? Can you hear me? Good, fast. And how can we deal with it? So that's my goal for today, to lay out the bigger picture. How can we deal with constantly changing organizations? How can we establish a kind of an improvement flow? And I want to share my insights and the strengths and weaknesses of the approach we have chosen so far. And because I believe in active involvement, and I don't want to talk here for 60 minutes, just fill you with information, I invite you to create your own rivers of change. And that's why we destroyed the seating and hang up all those lovely landscapes. So if you opt in and create your river of change, please grab a seat besides one of those flip charts. There are markers, there are post-its, and after each of the 3 major parts, you get 5 minutes to discuss in your group, but to add to those rivers what you learned. And at the end, I hope we have got a common understanding you share with the group of the topic. Any questions about that idea? I know it's an experiment, I've never done it before, and I'm not sure how it will work in that room because it's quite big, but I hope you're all in it for it. Okay. About questions, you can ask questions at any time and during the discussions, of course, as well. A little bit background information about me. Our organizational unit or software development department is part of Technical University Graz. I know it's quite unusual for a university doing software development, but well, we do it. We are about 100 people currently in the midst of an agile transition and having 7 feature teams. And of course, the rest of the organization are some small component groups yet to be included over a period of time. And we use large-scale Scrum as a guiding framework. Ian smiles. So that's the background. And the other background information, why the name of my talk? Well, my first idea, what I'm going to submit to the Agile Austria conference. And I thought, well, organizational improvement flow. But to be honest, that's a quite boring title. It's not going to attract anyone. Organizational improvement flow, that's just a row of words. And then I stumbled over the quote of Heraclitus. And Heraclitus stated, no man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and it's not the same man. And that is part of Heraclitus' flow theory, also known as Panta Rhei, and that's where the title comes from. So what's the flow for the organization? What does that mean for the organization? Well, in an organization, you can say as well, change is the only constant. Organizations are constantly changing. They're an ever-changing system. I leave my organization today, stumble over a book or a website, have a new idea. The next day, I step in, I'm not the same person anymore. And that applies to everyone in that organization. And since each organization, at least an agile organization, should have a goal, I kind of need some ways to align that change, that ideas with my organizational goals. So in my case, with the less organization, less is optimizing for flexibility, less is optimizing for customer business value. And in our special case, we optimize for student experience. I have to align all those ideas coming into my organization with my organizational goals. And of course, since we use less as a guiding framework, we've got less elements in here. And that's what we are doing currently, and I want to elaborate on that in my talk in more detail. All things flows, nothing abides, nothing stands still. It's constantly changing, and change, of course, causes issues. So now I have that issue in my organization that bugs me. That's why the bug is up there. It bugs me. Then I take ownership of that issue and have an improvement idea. What I'm going to do with that improvement idea now? Where do I turn to? Do I just freely flow through the organization and grab someone who helps me and do something and then I got a new state? Or what we are currently doing, we have two things, and I'm really sorry, there's missing something at the bottom there that should stay in community of practices. So it's on my slide, why it's not here. Then let's just directly jump to the next one because it's the more detailed view, the bigger one. So we have the idea, we have the ownership of that idea, and then I decide where I turn to. And of course, this is a binary view at the moment. There can be combinations of things I'm telling now. I turn, for example, to the overall retrospective. We have a retrospective about the issue, then we design an experiment. Out of that experiments, there is either a backlog item, which ends up in the sprint, or I have certain tasks, goals, hypotheses, which then as well end up in the sprint. We have a further look at that later on. Or I turn to the community of practice and say, well, that's in your area of expertise, what we're going to do about it. And they as well might design a backlog item, which then ends up in the sprint. In more detail, when do I do what? Well, the overall retrospective is to discuss cross-team organizational systemic problems with lots of perspectives. It's to inspect and adapt on an organizational level. And usually, or at least how we do it, everyone in the organization is invited. No matter if it's the one at the door opening the door and the gates for everyone up to the C-level, everyone is invited. And because I invite everyone, in our case 100 people, I need to facilitate that because it's going to be a large group event. And I then either have a very specific goal, have very small items, or I have identified a couple of issues I'm going to work on and have improvement hypotheses and goals. On the other hand, there's the community of practice, which is a group of people who share a craft, profession, a concern. I'm sure you've all heard about that before. And in comparison to the overall retrospective, where membership is invited, or at least participation is invited, participation in community of practice is voluntary. So I have a passion for something, I find myself a group, and I go there and discuss my experience. I share information, we create learning. And we heard in the morning, that's one of the most important things to do. An organization is a system of communication, and of course, a community of practice is an instrument of communication. They also decide on actions, and we have certain roles. If a community of practice is done properly, we have a leader, a sponsor with members, with certain types of members, and so on. Right after my talk, there is a talk specifically about community of practices, so if you're interested in more detail in that, I recommend going there. It's, I think, in that room. So, when do I do what? There are certain questions you could ask yourself. When do I turn to overall retrospective? And I'm just going to go through my cheat sheets over here a little bit. And when do I turn to a community of practice? In my experience, the most important questions is it something I want to discuss with a group of very experienced people and rather keep it small at first, then we turn to the community of practice? Of course, there might be a huge community of practice, but it depends on the company. If the company is 5,000 people, then a community of practice might easily be 100 people. But in our case, we are 100 people, and our communities are rather small, so they are up to 10 members, something like that. And the Retro, on the other hand, is they're usually bigger, so our retrospectives range from 15 to 25 participants, depending on the topic. And there are usually lots and lots and lots of perspectives coming in. So if I want that, I go to the other retrospectives. They're also facilitators, while our community meetings are usually less well facilitated because members doing that are not that used to it. Also, the other retrospectives in our case are very good starting point to share information as well. We've got people coming to the other retrospectives who say, we are not yet part of a feature team, or we are not yet part of the Agile organization, but we can learn how the others work. And that helps me with my work. So, when I've got an experiment and a backlog item, of course, work has to be done. Because I can make up experiments, I can make up backlog items, but somehow the work has to be done, and the organization has to be, a new state for the organization has to be created. And in our case, it happens in the sprints, of course, where else? So the experiments are integrated into the sprint events, that's what I stated there, and integrated into all activities. I've given some examples later what that could be. And backlog items. Backlog items just pass through the sprint cycle just as any backlog item would do. So for example, what could there be? If I've got some architectural problem, if I've got technical debt in my layering architecture, then in our case, the people who sees that problem, that issue, turns to the community of architects. The community of architects says, well, is it a problem? Is it an issue? We want to do something about it. If yes, they create a backlog item and say, well, in the future, we use design pattern X, Y, Z, and people then have to execute that in the sprint. If there's some bug and issue with product ownership, it's more or less a thing for the overall retrospective, because the product ownership influences everyone in the sprint cycle. Since we're doing less, we're doing one sprint, we're doing one product, and if there are some product ownership issues, it's influencing everyone. Okay, that's the first part. Sorry, that's not what I wanted. That should actually be 5 minutes. It's not working, then we use that clock. I now invite you to use 5 minutes to discuss with the peers next to you. And of course, ask myself question and add it to your rivers. Yeah, thank you, Ralph. We've got another timer here. Everything you heard in the past 15 minutes. And yeah, if you want to, you're invited to put it on your river, so you can later reflect on it and take your learning with you. It's for you. If you don't want it, just discuss it in pairs or ask myself questions. Discuss with your peers next to you what you've learned so far and add it to your river of learning. Because at the end, we see what you understood and share it with the group. That's the idea. And then we move on. There are post-its up here and at each of those flip charts. And Yep. So just 2, 1, 0. Okay, sorry about that. I replaced it with a new version and kind of got buggy. Okay, any questions immediately on your mind you want to clear up before we move on? No. Then, of course, each approach has its own strengths and weaknesses. We have always opposites, opposites create tensions, and we have to balance those tensions. How do we balance those tensions? Well, first, be aware where they are, and then you can further, again, create harmony. Wait for a second. Okay. And I want to share and do a little bit of retrospective with you. What are the strengths and weaknesses we found and experienced? And I like to start with the experiment because it's one of the important parts inside that flow. And I try to find my cheat sheet. Sorry, there it is. With the experiment, of course, we need ownership. We need responsibility. We need support. If I've got an experiment and I have no one who supports that, well, what's going to happen to my experiment? I just had it this week, actually. We did an over retrospective and someone suggested something to do. And then I asked the question, okay, we decided on that. Will you, and I was some C-level guy, please send it out to all of the folks that we are going to do that? And at the immediate moment he said, no, I'm not going to send it out because I'm not supporting it. So you always need to be sure you have the support for something. Especially, we heard it in the morning from Robert Fingen, stuff like whip limits, teams are blocked. My experiment is, I design whip limits, and nobody is going to pick up any more work if everything is blocked inside the whip limit. Then I need support for that because people stop working. And if that's not supported, it's not going to work. Ownership and responsibility goes with support. If someone takes ownership of an idea and says, I'm going to make that change, I'm going to do another retrospective about it, I'm going to design an experiment. If I'm responsible for that area, well, I'm fine, that's easy, then it's my responsibility, I'm going to do something about it, I get someone else to help me, run the experiments, and that's it. But if it's not my responsibility, and the other one who has that responsibility is not willing to give me the competence and trust to do that experiment, well, then I'm screwed as well. So make sure to know who is responsible. Am I the one who is responsible, or is it someone else? Get the support, get the ownership. And what's else with responsibility, I've experienced that a couple of times. We all are responsible. Those three are responsible. Who is going to do something? Well, I'm Eva, and I said Klaus is responsible, and I'm responsible. Klaus is doing it, and on the other hand, Klaus is saying that, well, Eva is going to doing it. So most of the cases, we try to have one person responsible, and then you can have that person accountable if nothing happens and see why nothing happens. And something else I saw was, well, that meeting is responsible. I hear people smiling. Yeah, I don't think I'm going further into that. So what else? An experiment is always based on a hypothesis. Like, I've got a problem with my sprint commitment. Teams are not delivering. My hypothesis is, well, we don't refine enough. Our stories are too big. If we make them smaller, we can deliver easily because we know more about our items, and then we can deliver better. So I need to know, first, hypotheses can fail, and if they can fail, I need to know when they fail. And that ties down to the SMART goals. I should know when I failed or succeeded. I I think you're all familiar with the SMART term, so I'm not going to go into that anymore. The other important valuable item where actually action and new value and change is created is the backlog item. A backlog item goes into the sprint, and of course, it's treated like any other backlog item. It's refined, it's splitted, it's cut, it's estimated, it's prioritized, and whatever else you do to backlog items in your organization. Create, add, acceptance criteria, split, and so on. And together with that, of course, very important is to know what's my business value. How does it fit into my plans? How does it fit into my strategy? How does it match with my product? When is it not valuable anymore? So if I prioritize it low and it's just on the lower end of my backlog all the time, there will be a point in time when it's not valuable anymore. And, of course, I've got actors in that game. An actor are people. People have character, and we all know there are people issues in the organization. And in the end, what the actions of the people are deciding the organization's fate, and in the end, my fate, because if I block, I will be stuck in an organization that is stuck, that is not improving. So which role, which mindset, which character I want to be in that organization is really important. And I decided day by day with what I choose, what I do in that organization is what the organization will become and who I will become inside that organization. And very important roles, of course, are, as we heard in the morning, the manager, the Scrum Master, and of course the product owner. I'm not going to go very deeply into the manager role because Boris has elaborated a lot about it today. But of course, we heard responsibility before. He needs to create adaptive reflexive processes, adaptive, just keep it adaptive processes. If he doesn't do that, the flow of improvement gets blocked. He can sponsor, he can allow people to make decisions, he can create leadership amongst the people, he can create safety, he is able to lead by example, or she, of course. He or she trusts, or she doesn't. He or she gives competency away, responsibility away, or she doesn't. And a very important part, especially in Agile transition, is the mindset. Am I aware as a manager that if there is change, do I need to change or do I don't want to change? So that's about the manager. The Scrum Master, of course, is very important as well, but because the Scrum Master is facilitating, for example, over retrospectives. He or she is facilitating improvement workshops. He or she believes in the process or not. If I don't believe in the improvement flow, no one else is going to believe in it. If I don't believe that there is value to talking in a retrospective about what bugs me, well, I can invite anyone, but there won't people show up, will there? What else can the Scrum Master do to support the process? Collect data, of course. That's all in the Scrum Master's job description. Facilitate meetings, I said that. And the last one on that slide is the product owner, of course. He or she is very important because if you got backlog items and goals, and she always prioritizes it out of the sprint, it's stuck forever in the next sprint. Okay? See someone smiling. I guess you experienced that. Okay, again, the invitation, do a little bit of recap, ask myself some questions, and we just let that run, and I put it on here. in your groups, create your own river of learning, of change. I come down. Andreas asked me a question, and I know it's on my cheat sheet, but I probably didn't say it. It's the first time I'm doing that talk, so I'm skipping back to that slide because I think it's valuable for the group. He asked me if there is a backlog item, it's clear what happens to it. Well, it passes through the sprint cycle, of course, like any other backlog item would. What happens to tasks and goals? We define goals and tasks in the overall retrospective, and then, well, if it's, for example, like I said before, we want to have smaller user stories, I have to attend the goal and reflect on the goal in each and every sprint meeting. For example, it applies to refinements, plannings, of course. If I have the goal to do better code reviews in pairs, I've reflected that goal in my stand-up, because in the stand-up I can plan who I'm pairing with or on all development activities I'm doing. Okay. Let's jump back. We were here. Okay, next steps. Of course, if we have an adaptive process and we want an adaptive organization, the process itself has to be adaptive as well, and we are going to change things in near future. And I like that quote from Heraclitus in that case, because it says big results require big ambitions. If we want a truly agile organization as your big ambition, you have to take next steps. You have to take bold steps. Next steps are not going to be that bold, but well, I like that quote because it's, yeah. Many organizations that actually achieve big results have big ambitions. So, what are our next steps? And as I said, change is the only constant, and our approach is changing as well. We're currently thinking of two things. Number one is improvement workshop, and I'll contrast to the overall retrospective later on, and the other one is the community of Agile. Since we have already communities in place, it's like a logical step to have a community of Agile as well. Well, some of you might ask, why didn't we have that in the first place? Well, it was simply a thing of resources. We had quite a changing of Scrum Masters in the organization, and at some point I was the only one. I'm not going to do a community with myself. Well, why not? Well, no, I didn't. Had too much to do anyway. And where is that placed in the whole picture? Well, of course, it's right in the middle of it. I've said before, communities are for sure learning, sharing, that's what I wanted to say, for discussing, for educating, for spreading information, and that has impact on everything in that cycle. It has impact on the sprint because people know better what's the reasons behind certain meetings. They know better what methods of estimation they need to use, of course. They know what the overall retrospective is, for what the overall retrospective is good. They know how to design experience. Whatever agile topic you need in your organization, it could go through the community of practice. And the good thing is people are requesting that in the organization at the moment. So we expect it to have an impact on all of those things. And the other one, the improvement workshop. We had some issues that were really big. So our overall retrospectives are usually like 2 hours, and it was not possible to have like actable goals or actable tasks after 2 hours. And then 3 people took responsibility of that issue, and nothing happened. So we thought in our Scrum Masters team, we're going to help them with that and help them facilitate the workshop for a certain topic. We're going to make it a little bit smaller, discuss it with less people, and that probably will be the improvement workshops. Which time slots and regularity we have yet to decide. As I said, in contrast to the overall retrospective, our retrospectives are usually rather big with lots of different perspectives. Improvement workshops are smaller and more focused on very specific topics. That's at least what we think will help us at that point. And one thing, and the sun is new at each day, what I think we will need at some point to have like that unifying goal you have in that over retrospectives breaking down into the teams. So we could do retrospectives on team level, on retrospectives we did on an organizational level, just to flow it down through the whole organization. But that's more like in a further future. So, another 5 minutes, and then after that 5 minutes, I hope someone will share with the group what they understood. Jede Community of Practice hat eine geteilte, Entschuldigung, ich muss jetzt den Kopf übersetzen, eine Shared Passion, ich kann sie auf Englisch auch sagen, oder a Shared Craft. Also Community of Architecture kümmert sich um die Softwarearchitektur zum Beispiel. Dann gibt es eine Community of Feature Tester, das sind unsere Feature-Tester, Feature-Team-Tester, die sich austauschen. Ich teste in meinem Feature-Team so, wie tut ihr das, was sind eure Probleme? Dann gibt es eine Community of, hilf mir.
Agile? Testing?
Da geht es um alles, was die agilen Methoden betrifft. Also jede
Grafik ist sehr anders dargestellt. Da ist sie nämlich in das Zentrum gefügt und hervorgehoben. Die anderen Communities waren da vorher immer in dem linken Teil.
Also wir sind natürlich auch als Community of Agile da drüben drinnen. Ja, ich habe nur den Einflusskreis, der betrifft natürlich gerade bei der Community of Agile die ganze Organisation im Vergleich die Community of Architects, die natürlich sich hauptsächlich das Produkt betrifft. Ja. Also wir auf Community of Agile nur so von der Vorstellung her beeinflussen über wie wir agieren, natürlich auch die anderen Communities, Community of Architects zum Beispiel, weil wenn unsere Meeting als Leading by Example schlecht facilitiert sind, was wird in den anderen Communities passieren? So als Vorstellung her. Das ist so.
Diese Community of Practice bei euch Entscheidungsgewalt?
Die haben auch Entscheidungsgewalt zum Teil, ja, gerade was die Architektur-Community betrifft. Wobei dort ist es
ein Community hat die Entscheidungsgewalt über alle Teams hinweg.
Ja. Das kann ich mit einem ganz klaren Ja beantworten, weil ich bin da der Lead und die Entscheidung treffe ich.
Okay. Also nicht die Community trifft die Entscheidung, sondern der Lead.
Nein, die Community trifft schon die Community gemeinsam, aber es ist natürlich schon eine Ausmachungssache. Wer in der Community sitzt momentan noch, gerade bei der Community of Architects zum Beispiel, sitzt der CTO drinnen und dann ist es dort einfach, dass die zu einer Entscheidung kommen, die auch supported wird. In der Community of Agile sitzt ich drinnen als Lead und die support diese Entscheidung. Folks, I know you don't see us with our backs. Thank you. Okay, thank you. I came down here now because that's when Heraclitus really had me because he said, all learning, all teaching is nothing without understanding. So what I hope that you share with the group what you understood based on who heard us. I've got a microphone if you need it. Who wants to go first?
Okay. So this group the group in this part of the room, in the middle, we have this way you drew us, and we pulled all the things up there which you talked about, not all of them, but the ones we remembered. So the very first one is we learned something about your person, so we learned something about you and all the basics. You taught us about Scrum, this basic topics like from the idea to the backlog and so on. We have one post up here which says the idea. So the overall retrospective is about talking about ideas and developing something new. You talked about the roles, manager, scrum master, and product owner, and that there are actions required. Goal commitment was a thing we heard in your speech, and the last one is I was not in the room when this was put up, so it says small steps to change, so big issues, and I am. So you talk about the big issue and share to change it into smaller. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you for summarizing. Someone else?
Yeah, we talked regarding what is really important, and we found out few points. So basically the first one is having the big retros. For example, having it on the company level, on the project level. This is really important to also have that we are from time to time, I'm not talking every sprint, but from time to time to really have the point, have to have a little bit more information from all the people in the company. Then the second point, to involve the stakeholders on many different levels and also involve them in the plannings or also the reviews. Of course, we also discussed it. It's not maybe always beneficial to involve them, but from time to time also it could be really useful to get additional information. And the last point, the accountability versus responsibility. So we need to differentiate between those two. Thank you.
Yeah, I won't summarize all we had on this flip chart here, but I want to just mention what I put there, which is rivers are always going in the same direction, and I like this meta lever analogy. So once the change is rolling, you can't revert it anymore. So this was the idea behind it. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But with rivers, that's probably really the case. So to change the direction of a river is probably not impossible, but definitely hard to do, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of like with the information Boris said in the morning, if it's out, it's out. And if it's flowing, it's flowing. Okay, thank you for that. I put up some recommendations for you where you could go in the conference to get further information about that. Sorry, put that further away. Well, of course, this is a thing of leadership, so every leadership session and book you can get and grab yourself is helpful. In our case, most of the elements are part of LESS, so tomorrow there is a LESS track, and communities of practice, of course. There is another track I'll attend afterwards. And we have a little bit of time left, so if there are any other questions about the topic, I'm here to ask. And for now, I say thank you, and that's where I got the references and the pictures and the icons from. Thank you to them. Any questions? Global questions? There is the mic.
It's much more of a global question. In your experience as
Sorry.
In your experience as LESS practitioner and an agile coach,
got me.
What is the difference between pure Scrum and LESS? Global question.
LESS is Scrum.
And
That's it.
why do we have two different names then?
We had actually a little bit of discussion yesterday and the day already going on about scaling, descaling frameworks. The opinions go from use your brain to use what's out there, and LESS is a good starting point when you don't know where to start to deal with all that huge product development. So that's the point about it. It's a starting point, and then you have to think or create an improvement flow. And LESS provides a little bit more of tools to get that started. Like it provides tools like the overall retrospective. It provides tools like system thinking and all the other principles that are out there. It highlights transparency. It does, but LESS further highlights it. It's taken transparency since LESS is Scrum from Scrum, and put it into its 12 principles as well.
May I just add to that? I think I can talk about less because I'm a less trainer, so that's the reason why I just wanted to add something. I mean, less is Scrum is one of the principles, so less is built on top of Scrum. So everything you can find in Scrum, you can find in less. But if you deal with further complexity, you need some additional mechanisms, and that's what less adds to Scrum. So that's pretty much how I see it. Sure. Not Scrum managers, Scrum masters.
Less masters, yes.
Yeah, can't you have less masters? I mean, one thing I'd like to add as well is that it's actually important that there's actually quite a big misunderstanding of what is Scrum. People read the Scrum Guide and they think that is the definition of Scrum, and it's not. And Sutherland and Schwaber are actually open about this. The Scrum Guide is not the definition of Scrum. The Scrum Guide is the definition of the rules of Scrum. There is a whole other world around, and Sutherland has repeatedly said this from when he first invented Scrum. Scrum is designed to be a set of patterns. It's described by a pattern language. Less, in my understanding, and it's nowhere near as good as Wolfgang's because I'm not a less trainer, but my understanding from talking to Bas Vodder and to Craig Larman is that what their intention was to do to add additional patterns alongside the patterns that are already there in Scrum to enable you to deal with a multi-team, larger product development. Yeah, it was never to remove anything from Scrum, it was to add additional patterns on to deal with the additional complexity.
And one word you said is very important. It's about multi-team Scrum, not multiple Scrum teams. There are other frameworks which deal with multiple Scrum teams. Less is about multi-team Scrum. If the differentiation is clear.
Okay, now you got a very comprehensive answer, I guess. We have time for one more question, if there is. Otherwise, just ask me outside. I'll be here the whole conference. Thank you.